meditation. the screen look good to everyone? Can you see it? Does it look like there's glare or anything? Does that look good for everyone? I think that's good. Good. Okay. Excellent. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I think we're almost ready to go. Yeah, maybe we can. Sure, thank you. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing? It's always a little bit tricky trying to do a meeting after lunch. All right. So I said in the beginning, at the beginning of our talk, I can talk fast. If you think I was talking fast, I actually talk a lot faster than that. So I will try to make sure to slow down. But if somebody just kind of gives me a little bit of a gesture, that'll let me know, because my brain just goes a million miles an hour, and so I'm trying to slow down a little bit. So if I go too fast, just let me know, because there's no point in me talking if no one can understand what I'm saying because I'm talking too quickly. All right. So before we get started with this afternoon's meeting, we'll just have a short word of prayer. This meeting will be a little less formal. I'll still be going over some information about how to spot the signs of abuse, whether it's within the elderly population or in domestic violence. And even I might mention a few things about children, because that is also another vulnerable population that can fall in this category, and talk about ways that we can support. But largely, I really want to try to make sure I leave sufficient time for questions. That's usually where I can give you the most beneficial information, because your questions let me know what you specifically need. I can give you what generically is helpful, but if you ask me questions, and I can try to be as specific as I can. If I don't know the answer to a question, I will acknowledge that too, but as much as I can answer those, I'll make sure to do that. But let's go ahead and start with the word of prayer, and then we'll begin. Father in heaven, we just want to thank you for this Sabbath day. We want to thank you for allowing us to be able to partake of food today, and to be able to read your word, Lord, for this is where many of the answers of our life come from. And I just pray that as we look at this topic this afternoon, Lord, that you would help us, Lord, to know that there are ways that we can support our community and even support each other, and that there's support for us if we've been through some of these issues that we're going to be talking about this afternoon. I pray that you would be our teacher and our guide, and I pray that you'd be with my mouth, Lord, that I would speak the words that would be a blessing and an inspiration to your people. And ask for this in the name of Jesus. Amen. All right, so building domestic violence awareness and awareness of elder abuse, and looking at some of the statistics around this. So our overview for today, we're going to be understanding the reality of domestic violence and elder abuse within the church. We're also going to be recognizing abuse, looking at what the red flags are, and what are some of the common behaviors in the Adventist context. Now, I'll just tell you right up front that when you look at all the data about what happens in the church, and this is true of Adventist church and the Christian church in general, most of the time the statistics are almost identical. It's the same thing with divorce rates, the rates of abuse, all these things, they match almost identical to the world on many of the data. And you're going to see some of that here today as well. But in either case, there are still ways that you can become educated with this, so that you can be able to help people that you run into, either through the ministries that you serve, or even within the congregation. And so we're going to look at prevention and care and building a supportive church environment, which I think is probably going to be the most important part, because as a church, probably the best resource that people can have is you. I mean, if people can come to this church and know that there's ways that they can get help, or that they can at least be connected to help, that's what's largely going to be the most helpful. Okay. And so I was asked about kind of a decision tree, but I'll tell you just probably one of the best ways to start identifying abuse is really to start the conversation, right? A lot of times the reason why we don't know things is because we don't ask. Now, that's an awkward question to ask, like, hey, has anyone hit you before? That can sound like a really blunt question, and it would be if you don't already have an established relationship with folks. But that's kind of the other critical piece here, is that we want to establish good personal relationships with people so we can ask these questions. Even as a therapist, not everybody is immediately open about what's going on in their lives. So I had, we'll call this person, we'll call him Robert. I was seeing Robert for therapy, and he came in with like really severe depression, lots of pain, wasn't able to work, was probably taking a little bit too much painkillers and opioids to help manage the pain. And so I thought our main focus here was depression, and that's what we talked about for a long time, very severely depressed. Like sometimes we think about depression of just people crying. I had a session just to give you just a feel for this. Some of you have had awkward silences where somebody doesn't talk for like a minute or so after you ask the question. As therapists, we're trained to sit with awkward silence. You know, you ask the question and then you don't immediately try to jump in to fill in the blanks. And so I was like, okay, and this was still early in my career. I was like, I'm going to try this out. And so I was talking to him and I said, Robert, what do you think it is that keeps this depression alive? A question kind of like that. And he said, and he was looking down and he was like, I'm like, ooh, this is my chance to wait for an answer. And then so he was doing this, and then it had been 3 minutes, and I was like, now 3 minutes is a long time, and you're waiting for somebody to talk. And so 3 minutes I went by, and I was like, ooh, man, I'm really getting my workout in today. And then so 3 minutes turned into 10, and then turned into 15, and then turned into 20, and 20 turned into 28, and 28 turned into 36 minutes, and then 36 minutes turned into 42, and then after the last head shake, he said, I don't know. And I was like, what? 45 minutes to wait for it, and I don't know. That was insane. So anyway, so sometimes you have to wait a while. But what actually happened is that, and it's probably in no small part due to that kind of conversation, what actually ended up happening is a few months later, Robert actually came in. He's like, you know, I've been coming here the whole time, and I never actually told you this, but for like 3 years out of my life, I was repeatedly sexually abused. And it was in a church context. And this particular one, you know, I'll just let you know, it could have been any one of the churches that I'm going to mention right now, Catholic, Mormon, or Jehovah's Witness. But what all three of those have in common is there's a very, very, very tight-knit community around the clergy. And so if a clergy member does something, those things are much, much easier to conceal because there's such a tight-knit group around that it's very hushed. And this is part of the reason why this abuse was not talked about. Now, if me as a therapist is working with somebody for a year and then has like a session where I sit there for 45 minutes and get absolutely nothing other than I don't know, just know that you'll probably have to be in here a little bit long haul with people when you ask these questions. But you leave the space for people to talk. That's one of the biggest things you can do, is be somebody who's both willing to ask and willing to listen. But when people trust you, they will share things with you that you maybe never thought you would hear. There's another thing that also puts us in a unique spot. Now, has anybody here ever been a cab driver or done any transporting of people or like picked up a hitchhiker before? I mean, I'm not saying this is the safest thing in the world to do, but anybody ever do any things like this before? Okay, so if you ever pick up hitchhikers, you will find that they will tell you all kinds of stuff. And some of it is because there's a phenomenon when somebody's talking to a stranger, sometimes they'll be more open with a stranger than they will with people they know, because they know that they're not going to see you again. This is part of what allows therapy to work, is that there's an element of confidentiality. So sometimes when we're in one of the best spots to be able to ask people questions or to really talk to people are when we are actually relatively new, but we have a very designated role within their lives. Now, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but maybe that's okay. In the church context, one of the things that can be helpful is if you actually have groups that are here to talk to and support people through things. It doesn't have to be as direct as domestic violence, but sometimes even working on things like depression. I think you all are having Dr. Nedley come here. Did I catch that right? When is that? Was that supposed to happen? First weekend of September? Yeah, so if you have a program like that, this is oftentimes another arena in which you can do this. If the topic is related, people will actually begin to open up about things that they normally don't talk to you about. Now, because people find out not too long into my being present at a church what I do for a living, people will say, oh, we don't have anything like that going on at our church. And then I tell people what I do, and then slowly over time, one by one, it's like, yeah, this happened, yeah, that happened. And I'll share some of those stories as we go along. But again, the two major steps are being able to develop the relationship and being able to ask the question. right? From there, you can start to ask questions about what kind of abuse that somebody's experiencing, because it can be physical, it can be financial, it can be sexual, it can be psychological or emotional, it could be neglect. Those are your major categories, but the biggest thing is to build the relationship and ask the question. I know that sounds really simple, but it really is, this really is how this works. It's similar with suicide prevention. One of the reasons why people don't disclose that they're suicidal is because people don't ask. And sometimes people are afraid to ask. They think if they ask, it's going to create the problem. But we can put this to the test right now. If I asked any of you all if you were thinking of committing suicide, would you be like, no, but now that you mention it, I mean, like, that's not how that works. You know, people aren't just suddenly like, wow, you just put the idea in my head. Now I don't want to live anymore. That's not how that works. Like, don't be afraid to ask questions. You want to build the relationship, but ask the questions. All right, does that make sense so far to everyone? Okay. All right, so let's take a look at domestic violence and elder abuse. So the prevalence of domestic violence and elder abuse they really are present in all communities. And so you're going to see similar numbers. In fact, with elder abuse, one of the things that makes this unique is that almost every form of abuse does happen to elders, but probably one of the biggest ones is financial exploitation. Now, I'm not sure how many people are aware of this, but there has been a wave of a specific kind of abuse that's targeted towards elders, and it's usually like phone scamming. Okay. And the way that this works, and I want you all to be aware of this because you may have people in your life that are older, or maybe you've received these kind of calls. They know when to call. They call during the mid-afternoon when somebody who is older does not have their kids around. And so it's usually going to be at some time late mid-morning and right before kids get out of school. It's going to be during that time. And they're usually going to be very forceful about their call. I need to speak to so-and-so. I need to speak to them right away. Your son, granddaughter is in trouble, and they actually are being held out on bond. That's one of their favorite ones that they use. And the way that they will know your information is because your address, your first and last name, information about your family, people can find this information out. And what they'll do is they'll call around and they'll test call, and they'll have different people call at different times so that they get the information right. Like, is your grandson Sally? It's like, no, is your grandson? Is your granddaughter Sally? It's like, no, my granddaughter's Jane. It's like, oh, okay, sorry to call you. Then they have somebody else call back, and then they'll say, hey, you know, we've got Jane, and she's been booked on XYZ. We need you to send out bail for her. And they will collect these bail bonds from these folks, and sometimes the average amount of money that they dupe them out of is between like $2,000 and $10,000. They will empty out the savings accounts and inheritance funds from these folks without anybody knowing until it's far too late. So one of the biggest ways is the financial exploitation. And the way that they typically do it is with these scamming calls, and they do it by getting information about that person's family and telling them that their grandchild or child is in big trouble. Because most grandparents care about their kids. Anybody here grandparents?
I've had that call.
Yes, yeah, and it's very aggressive. Other ways that they do it is they'll pretend to be like a police charity. Like, we're giving to this particular charity, we support our police department, and they will talk people out of copious amounts of funds. Other times, what they'll do is they will say that they need to give somebody a refund because they overcharged them, and they need to credit the money back to their card. And what they will do is sometimes they'll even credit them a couple $100s, like, wow, you're really honest about this. But then, because they have the information, then they go ahead and debit several $1,000s later off of the same card. And so again, these are some of the primary ways that those in the elderly community can be exploited. The other ways this happens sometimes, and sadly, is with family members. Similar to domestic violence, the number one perpetrator. Okay, so yeah, so the number one perpetrators of crimes against the elderly are very similar to the same situation you find with like sexual assault, and it's usually it comes from within the family. It's usually a family member that does this. Sometimes it's like with the grandchildren. Sometimes it's the children, but oftentimes it's somebody who has an inside track. And sometimes they'll use third-party people, so you don't really know it's them doing it, because they know who the scammers are to reach out to try to get a hold of what's in grandma's wallet or what's in grandpa's wallet. So these are real things that happen. This is also part of the reason why it's so hard to report some of these abuses, because if a family member is guilty of the crime, this does something to the family structure. People don't want to talk about it because they don't want to embarrass the family, or they don't want to embarrass the institution. It is really hard to want to go to a church if you find out the youth pastor has been abusing some of the kids in the Sabbath school class. But this is stuff that happens, and people don't want to talk about it because they don't want to offend people out of the church. But as I mentioned from the front, while you might protect the reputation a little bit longer, guess who's paying the price? You know, it's always the victim that pays the price. They're the ones that have to carry around this terrible secret so that the church can feel good about itself. And we really don't do the church or the child or the person who is the victim of the abuse any favors by doing that. It's actually much better for the church to take a stand and say, we don't agree with this. This is what we've done. We've taken disciplinary action against, you know, said person, whether that's an official in the church or not. And this is how we've dealt with it. But a lot of times it comes from within. Now, some of you are familiar with the quote that says that we have more to fear from within than from without. Did you know that that's actually just true universally? I mean, like, I'm sitting here talking to you about family violence and like things that go on, like domestic violence and abuse, and it's the same thing. You're far more likely to have many of these things that we're so terrified about. They're more likely to happen from inside than outside. All right, how's everybody doing with this information? I know it's kind of a little bit heavy. I'm not advancing through slides. I'm kind of talking to you a little bit more because I can give you faster information by just talking. So you might be asking questions like, well, why is it that people who commit these abuses sometimes can be in positions of authority like teachers and clergy? Why would this be the case? Well, part of the reason it's the case is not because the church is just blind and like is purposely, you know, bringing people in that are guilty of crimes, but it's because the perpetrators themselves know where they're most likely to get their targets. So the perpetrators, they choose jobs where they're going to be around the people that they want to take advantage of. So it's not like the church is like picking these people. It's like, oh, I think you'd make a good pastor, and then it's like, oh, you turn out to be an abuser. No, that abuser tries to put himself out there as a good pastor because he knows that that's where his targets are. All right, does this kind of make sense to everyone? All right, so I would make this clear. I'm not here to bash the church or anything like that, but I'm telling you that this is just how predators work. They know where their prey is, and that's where they work. If I wanted to get a hold of a lot of meat, I'm not going to work at a pickle farm like this. That's not where I'm going to be going. I'm going to go where I can find the things that I'm looking for. And so this is why this happens. All right. So there is a need for awareness. The more you talk about these things, the harder it is to get away with them. Part of the reason why things like this persist is because people aren't actually talking to each other. And one of the things that I think we can do as a church is to be a church that has open dialogue, where we actually just bring these things up. And that's why I know it's always a little bit of a risky thing for me to stand up here and talk about things that are hard to talk about. But once you do, people open up. I've never given a presentation like this where at the end of it, at least 2 or 3 or more people don't come up and say, I've been through this. And a lot of times these are people that you know and that you could have known or any of these things, but these things happen. But the way that you begin to address them is by opening dialogue. You give people the opportunity to speak. All right. So what else can I share with you here? So the statistics right now is that 1 in 3 women has experienced domestic violence, as I mentioned earlier today. Again, those statistics are very similar within the church context. 1 in 6 has been the victim of actual or attempted sexual assault. And here's the part that you really want to be aware of. 50% of sexual assaults are directed at women 16 years and under. Right? So that's actually the age when it's most likely to happen is 16 and under. Now, these numbers are not small. And if you're just looking at them, again, the probability that someone that you know or have come across has experienced something like this is relatively high. Now, again, to be clear, this doesn't mean that, that people always have to be able to like air these kind of experiences, because it's a very vulnerable thing to talk about, and it can be very embarrassing for people. And so making sure that people at least know who they can trust and speak to is important. Now, does anybody here know of any counselors that actually are in your area? Is anybody connected with any local counselors or know of any therapists or psychologists? Okay. So that's another thing that I would say probably that we could do a better job of as a church is knowing about what supports exist. Now, I think, you know, even just your average therapist can be very helpful in abuse situations, but it's a lot better when you can find at least a Christian, and even better if you can find an Adventist that does this kind of work. Because when people have a connection on a spiritual level as well as on that psychological level, then the chances of them healing from these experiences goes way up. And so one of the things that I would recommend right away is starting to build some resources that are local and near to your church, because again, those are going to be the best resources. Now, there's a domestic violence line which I'll have to try to see if I can pull up because I wasn't able to put all of it into my slides, but this is another resource that I believe would be very good for you. So as I mentioned before, the abuse does transcend boundaries. Again, no one is immune to this, but again, the reason for the lack of immunity is not because of It's not because of doctrines that people like this come in. It's because people like this are looking for opportunities. Now, in John chapter 10, Jesus gives a parable of being the good shepherd, right? But then he says that even though he's this good shepherd, who is it that tries to come in? He calls them the thief, right? Now, where are thieves going to show up? And let's say I'm a sheep stealer. If I'm a sheep stealer, where am I going to go? I'm going to go where the sheep are, right? Right. So this is why this happens. So again, this is not because there's something like intrinsically wrong with our church, but it's because our church is a target. And this is just something that we have to be aware of. Now, this isn't to terrify people, but just be aware of it. Okay. Anyway, so I don't want to scare everybody, but I do want you to be aware. We actually started posting signs at our previous church around the bathrooms, making sure that parents would attend the bathroom with their small children, because a lot of times people just kind of let their kids run off to the restroom. And please believe me, I know for a fact that predators do come into the church and look for opportunities like this. Now, this does not mean that our church is not a safe place, but it's a safer place when you have eyes watching. One of the primary jobs of a shepherd for most of the day, you know what he's doing most of the time? He's protecting. He's overseeing. Like, he's watching to see if there's anything trying to attack. He sees when the wolf is coming and he does something about it. And I believe that God wants us to be these good under-shepherds for our church. All right. So just to give some really direct pieces here, there are different types of elder abuse. So there is physical, emotional, and financial. The neglect part is one that I'll share with you, because this is sometimes one of the ones that you can spot without even somebody telling you. And it's usually when you see hygiene really getting worse. So somebody had a situation where somebody who was older had come in, and they noticed that when they started talking, their breath smelled like absolutely awful. But the reason that their breath smelled so bad is because they had not brushed their teeth. They admitted they hadn't had their teeth brushed in like 3 weeks, right? That's a problem. And they were being taken care of by their daughter, and their daughter was just kind of taking them. The reason that this conversation happened is because the psychiatrist had seen them for their meds, and when they had just a one-to-one conversation with them, they realized that was not quite right. And so deteriorating hygiene is one of these big signals that says that something could be happening. A second kind of sign that you can see are, of course, things like bruises. Now, this can be really challenging because if someone is kind of frail and is elderly, then falls are common. And so sometimes it can be hard to sort through. But the way to find out about this is asking, after you fell, what did they do to help treat it? And a lot of times if they tell you that, I fell, but then there was nothing done about it, there was no treatment, I didn't get any, there was no bandages, those are things where you want to start to ask more questions, that if there's not any follow-up care, then these things can be signals and signs that something could be going on. Another one is that if you notice a change in behavior whenever the person walks in the room, that can be a pretty big sign, like where the person is being very open, but when the other person walks in the room, they start to change how they're talking to you. That becomes a pretty large a red flag. Now, sometimes that could just be happening because maybe they just have a hostile relationship with that person, that really like them, and they don't really trust them with anything. That can be a situation, but these are just at least reasons to ask. This does not guarantee abuse is happening, but it's an indication that it could be happening. All right. So far, so good? Everybody on the same page so far? All right. So I'll give a few more here, and then I want to be able to pause to leave a little bit of space for questions, because like I said, we can talk about a lot of technical information, but I really do want to make sure that we have time for your questions. All right. So other things that can happen are things like abandonment and isolation. There's been cases where a person who is not able to fully care for themselves, hasn't had their child or whoever's supposed to be taking care of them come by the house for days on end, which can be very dangerous for somebody who is medically fragile. So again, these are all some of those signals and signs that some kind of abuse could be happening here. All right, so what I wanted to give here would be just a couple of case scenarios. As I've given just a couple with those who are in the elderly community, but also tell you ones that have happened within the church context. And maybe this will just give you a little bit of a snapshot as to why things like this go a little bit underreported. So I have to change around a few names here and situations. So we're just going to call this particular gentleman, we're going to call him Greg. So Greg has a disability, a little bit of an intellectual disability, but they used to go to they used to be like a part of a Pathfinder group, and while they were there, they stayed there until they were about in their 20s, but then something happened in their 20s where they'd actually touched a child. Now, the Pathfinder leader became aware of this and knew that they should report it, but they were really concerned because if they reported it, they knew that this would really cause a lot of problems for that particular family because maybe they'd try to arrest this young man. They already have enough issues because he has a disability. And so they decided, we know what, we're going to be gracious. We're just going to forgive them. Okay. And so they decided to forgive this person, and then they committed the same offense again several years later. And then they decided, well, we still don't want to ruffle feathers too much. And if we bring something up about it now, then we can actually not just get the family in some hot water, but maybe we get ourselves in hot water. Maybe they'll shut down our Pathfinder organization. Maybe they'll shut down the school that we're associated with, and we don't want that. And so because they didn't report it the first time. So now if it comes out even later, now they have a larger case that can come out against them, and now it can not just affect the family, but maybe jeopardize the group and maybe even the school that this group is associated with. Okay. Now you see what's happening to this case, because every time we cover it up, what's happening to the fallout? It keeps getting larger and larger, right? Now, fast forward to my involvement with this. So now you fast forward, and this person is now 35 years old, and they're still allowed to come around these premises where kids are. And they started harassing somebody that was at the school and was following them around and would not let them walk away. They said, hey, I need to talk to you. And they were like, I don't want to talk right now. And they try to walk away, and this person actually caught this on video. And you can see this person refusing to let them walk away. Okay. Now, at this point, something should have been done. Now, of course, because I'm there, I've already called and dealt with this. But something should have been done by this point. But guess what? By the time we get to this point, people still don't want to say anything because it's going to jeopardize the institution. Now, let me ask you a question. What should be the priority of the people involved here, whether we're talking about the leadership or the institution itself? What should be the priority?
Do the right thing.
Yeah, you do the right thing. Yeah, you leave the results to God. Now, one of the ways that Christians oftentimes get exploited here, and this is part of the reason why you'll have people who will come through the church and say, hey, you know, my car broke down, I just need $20, or somebody can just put me in a hotel. You know why they come to church, folks? Because they can play on your guilt. And it's like, you know, Jesus said you got to help the poor, you got to help people out, you know, the Good Samaritan, and y'all seem like a Good Samaritan church, and the game gets rolling. Yes. You absolutely get taken advantage of, and this is part of the reason why churches are such big targets. Now listen, I 100% believe in being compassionate to people. I love helping people. That's what I've committed my entire life to. But it's not help when you enable people. That is not help. When people come into our church and say, hey, I just need some money so I can get to a hotel and all these things, I say, you know what, we won't be able to do that, but you can come to our potluck, we can hook you up with a little bit of food so you can get through the rest of the day, because you can only eat so much food in a day. And I know that if I just give them a little extra food, then that will at least tide them over for what they need to take care of. And hands down, when you do something like this, they will usually get irritated with you. And you know why? Because they're not actually hungry. Like, people who are actually hungry don't get irritated with you when you offer them food. And they don't insist that I must have a hotel. That's not how this works. In fact, one of my favorite con experiences that I had, my wife and I, we were going to church in Truckee, and in Truckee, there is an older population there, and the folks there are pretty wealthy. They're like retired physicians and nurses and stuff, you know, just people who've really done well in their lives. And this gentleman came in, and he was like, hey, you know, sob story. It's like, man, look, my wife died, and I'm stranded out here. I'm like 70 miles away from home, and I really need some help. And so kind-hearted people were like, hey, let's gather around. We can give you some money and all sort of stuff. Me and my wife were like, no, you know, if where you need to get to is up to, like, if it's Susanville, we're like, if you need to get up there, we'll give you a ride. We actually live in Reno, and that's not too far away. That'll add a couple extra hours to our day, but we got you. And he's like, oh, really? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, well, I mean, but you could just give me money. It's like, nah, man, we got you. We got you. And so we had him. And so we had him in the car, and he was telling his story about how his wife died and how it was a year ago, and like just really sewed this story up. And it's like, man, well, we're so glad we can come in and help you. And then once we got to Susanville, like, he starts getting really agitated. It's like, oh, you can just drop me off here. It's like, just here? Like, we just pulled into some random. He's like, yeah, this is the place. I was like, all right, man, well, do you need any help? It's like, no, I'm good. And it's like, well, let me give you my number. And it's like, I gave him my number, and he started to type it in. And when I gave him the last digit, he hit the call button before he put the last digit. And he's like, all right, I got your number. See ya. And he was just upset. And I was very happy. I was very happy. He got a ride. That was cool. So I got to do my Christian duty. But all the elderly people at my church did not get taken advantage of. Now, this gets better. 8 years later, my wife and I, we moved to Washington. And I see somebody, and it's like, this guy looks familiar. Now, by the way, he said he was from Canada, and he's like, oh, yeah, I speak French. I was like, oh, je parle français. You know, and I was like, telling him like the little bit of French that I knew, but just enough to get myself in trouble. And then he didn't respond in French, and I was like, okay, you probably don't actually speak French, do you? Anyway, so he came in, and this guy came in, and sure enough, he targeted some of the older people there. We had a gentleman there who was very generous, would just give the shirt off his back to anybody. And he started talking to him, and my wife was like, I've seen this guy before. And I was like, I know, he looks really familiar. And then we went to potluck, and then he sat down, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is the guy. This is the guy. And I told the pastor, I was like, hey man, this dude is trying to like dupe people out of their money. And he's like, really? I was like, yeah. I was like, okay, well, let me talk to him. I was like, hey man, what's your name? And he told me his name. I was like, where are you from? Same story. I was like, ooh, consistency. You know, like he said he was from Canada. He's like, all right, cool. He's like, yeah, I speak a little French. Oh, je parle français aussi. He's like, oh, yeah. And then he said a couple French things, and then he got nervous, and he stopped talking. And so at some point, one of our church members was going to get him a hotel and was going to give him all kinds of money and all this stuff. And I took him outside and talked to him. I was like, hey, listen, man, you probably don't remember me, but I remember you, and we're not doing this. We're absolutely not doing this. You're not going to take advantage of our church. But he's like, wait, what are you talking about? You don't know me, man. You don't know what kind of trauma I've been through. It's like, well, you told me that your wife died a year ago. He's like, yeah, she did die a year ago. And I said, but you said that 7 years ago or 8 years ago. So unless she died twice, he's like, well, I have PTSD, so my memory doesn't work well. Do you know anything about PTSD? It's like, yeah, since the last time I talked to you, I became a therapist, and so I work with PTSD all the time. And your story does not check out. Now listen, when you protect the flock, you're not doing God any kind of disservice. God does not ask us to be foolish and gullible. It's okay to be wise and to know how to spot abuse when it's happening. And we need to be people who are able to protect. All right. So I'll pause here because we're right about at, I've been talking for like 35 minutes. And it means we have about 20 or so minutes for us to be able to take some questions. So I want to make sure that I'm able to address any questions you all might have. There's a microphone up here, and I might be able just to hear you just fine. But any questions that anyone has that you would like to be able to ask?
Tessera asked me if I would pass the mic around.
Okay, yes. All right, so questions.
I had a question, actually. You were talking about, people targeting, maybe it's not, they target being a pastor or leadership positions so that they have access. Do you think they're also intentional about it?
About who they target?
With so much
just like
forethought. I mean, the cases of abuse, domestic violence, do you think there's so much forethought in, the targeting of like, I'm going to get this job so I can get to this population rather than it just happening? Do you know what I mean?
Yes. So there's a couple of answers to that. It's easier to talk to the one around children. Most people who struggle with pedophilia, and that's the attraction to children, they become aware of this very early in life. They're usually aware of it around adolescence because similar to people having same-sex attraction, usually people who are attracted to younger children start to realize this around the time of puberty and adolescence. So they know ahead of time that this is a struggle for them. And when they put them, I've talked to some people who know that they struggle with pedophilia and they refuse to put themselves around kids because they don't want to tempt themselves with that. So there really are people out there who struggle with pedophilia, but they're not going to exploit children or not even going to put themselves in a line of temptation because they know they could. People who are deciding to purposely put themselves around kids when they know they struggle with that kind of attraction are putting themselves in the line of fire. So is it premeditated? Maybe not in the sense that I've got this 5-year plan that I'm going to show up in this particular situation, but is it premeditated in the sense that I know this is a struggle for me and this is a situation where I'm likely to be able to gratify my desires on some level? They're very conscious of that, the fact that they're putting themselves in a place where they can. And then there's some people who are actually just sociopaths and they purposely do it. They know exactly what they're doing. Not all people who are pedophiles are the same. There's some people that have like romanticized ideas behind this. And I can just be straightforward with you all. There's some people who think that that they can somehow have a romantic equal exchange with a small child, and there's other people who just actually enjoy hurting and don't care, and like they're very much desirous to be in control of another human being. That second type is always doing it on purpose. That first type may be a little more accidental, but even there, it's still not. They could do otherwise, and they know they probably should, and they decide not to. And so, yeah, so it's kind of a dark thing, but like it is a real thing, and it's just good to be aware. And just asking the questions is good. I do have a burden for even counseling with people who have been abusers in the past, whether we're talking about in the domestic violence case or even in the case of pedophilia, because a lot of these people, some of them actually really do want help. They recognize this is not healthy for them, and I believe that they do deserve that chance, but we also have to make sure that we're still protecting our kids first. So we can serve them, but without putting our children at risk. And so I do have compassion for that. I've worked with several people who are sex offenders and who have been guilty of those crimes. They really are trying to rehabilitate themselves. I think they deserve a real shot at that, and we have to just be smart about how we do it.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Other questions? And even if it's about some of the stuff from the sermon today, because maybe some people haven't noticed that the Bible seems to address the fact that, like domestic violence and things like these even obviously existed in Old Testament times, but that these things even play out on a spiritual scale. But did people have any other questions about that, or just maybe even related questions about counseling that I can answer while I'm here?
So you were encouraging asking those intrusive questions to inquire about victims or abuse. How do you, is there a wrong way about doing that after you've built a relationship? Mm-hmm. Or is there what is the appropriate way to kind of inquire and show compassion, show that you're concerned, but, mm-hmm. those are somewhat intrusive, not somewhat, those are intrusive mm-hmm. questions. And I think also with that, being able to recognize those things that maybe have affected people years ago, mm-hmm. That might be, preventing their spiritual or, mm-hmm. Personal growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So both questions are very legitimate. The only time I would ever think that it's appropriate to ask that question is if you think something's happening currently, or if something from, I really stick more so with like the current thing, because like we want to make sure we're addressing things that are happening in the here and now. Things that are of more of a historical nature, the things that are going to signal to you that it's appropriate to talk about this is if it's already a part of the conversation that we're having. If we're talking, and the context for this are oftentimes going to be in closer proximity relationships. Like, so I know that we've had ministries that are focused on grief. We've had ministries that are focused on people needing to work through forgiveness. And these become like the areas where sometimes these things can become relevant. But on that previous slide over there, the question I think needs to start broadly, and if we do try to go any further with that question, it really has to be with the consent of the person that we're speaking to. So they might just signal to you that, yeah, something's happened, but I don't really want to talk about that. It's not our place to just keep probing and trying to jump in there, because you don't want to dig up things, because that can be re-traumatizing for somebody to start sharing these things. Probably one of the easiest populations that I can think of where they're likely to have traumas is like military, if anybody's had combat experience. And you usually don't say like, hey man, did you ever kill anybody? Like, you don't ask those kind of questions. But this is more so like when we're talking about in the context when you suspect abuse. And if you suspect that something is currently happening, that's more so when you would ask more direct questions like that. But that's because you're trying to find out if somebody is safe. Otherwise, to just go in that direction only makes sense if it's like within the context of like, this is what our ministry is focused on. But even then, we want to make sure that people have supports before you try to like really dig deep into their experience. I think that goes outside of the bounds of what you want to do if you're not a professional working with someone. But just letting people know that it's okay for them to share that and to get support around it. Does that? Anyway, one more.
I loved how you brought out, I mean, it's a popular story of the woman at the well. But Jesus he meets her where she's at, and he kind of goes directly in, you know, go tell your husband,
Yeah.
you know, and she's like, well, I don't have a husband, you know, but it's just kind of, I don't know if you could kind of elaborate spiritually how he kind of is able to meet her needs.
Yes.
But he kind of puts it, you know,
Pretty straightforward.
He addresses the issue.
Yes. No, so, okay, so the position that Jesus is in, I would compare more to the position like an elder is in, or that a pastor is in, or like a mother in the church is in, right? Like, so he's coming there from a very pastoral place when he's speaking to her this way. And in fact, the strategy he's using, I can tell you, like in counseling, there's a technique that follows what he did. And he starts with what are some introductory conversations, but he's slowly trying to get her to become more aware of her own experience. And by the time he puts that information out there, he makes it clear that, first of all, he already knew this about her, right? So when he says, go call your husband, he knew the answer before he asked. So he wasn't just digging to find something out, right? So that's very different because he already knew what was there, but now he's telling her like, hey, this is a real issue that you're dealing with and we need to talk about it. And sometimes we might know something. So like for me, in a church capacity, I would probably only counsel with men. You know, as a therapist, I counsel with people all over the spectrum, but as an elder, I would primarily counsel with men. But like if I know another brother struggling and I know that, you know, something else is going on in his life, in a one-to-one conversation, if he's like, oh, nothing's happening, it's like, well, brother, what's going on here? But I would make sure that there's this established rapport, that you know that I'm here to support you. I haven't told anybody about this. I'm not gossiping about you with everybody, but I am addressing you directly because this is a real issue of the heart that needs to be dealt with. And this seems to be the place that Jesus is coming from. He already knew this. He wasn't just like digging to find something out. He already knew, and he was addressing it with her so that she had an opportunity to do something about it. But he offers her the living water long before he lets her know that he knew she was living in sin. And that kind of grace makes it easier for people to talk about you because they know that they have your acceptance in spite of the information that you know. And so anyway, there's probably more that could be said there, but does that at least, yeah. All right, and we have one back here, and then we'll bring Mike up.
Can you talk about elder abuse within the church or within families that are related to the church in the context of Matthew 18, and how does that wisdom apply? And then secondly, when the elder abuse is coming from an elder to an elder, and the situation is of extreme sensitivity, in other words, in approaching the person who is wrong or who's offending, that person is extremely sensitive, extremely, like you mentioned, victim, like they point to themselves as victim. Mm-hmm. So just talk about that in light of.
Yeah. Easy questions, right? All right. So the first one was how do you address when this is happening, especially within elder abuse happening in the context of the family, in light of Matthew 18? Okay. So everybody's familiar with Matthew 18. So the way that you address this is it's one-to-one first, right? And there is great wisdom to that. Part of the reason why people talk to me as a therapist is because of confidentiality. And I can't say enough about confidentiality. Like you don't blow people out. Like you don't spread people's business to everyone, because once you do that, you're going to create one of the biggest barriers to change, and that's defensiveness. If somebody's on the defense, the chances of them changing are very low. And God understands this. Now, you don't keep it small if it needs to go larger. But the second thing I would say as a cautionary note, where I think Matthew 18 has to be followed with wisdom, is when there's an element of like threat or violence, right? Like to go one-to-one in a domestic violence situation and confront the abuser is a bad idea. And part of the reason for that is that the vast majority of mass homicides that happen in the United States happen in the context of domestic violence. It is extraordinarily dangerous to put yourself in the line of fire with a domestic violence situation. you do not go one-to-one on a situation where your personal safety or the personal safety of others is at risk. And even with the elder abuse thing, you want to be very mindful of that because people can be a lot less stable than they appear. And so you do need to still approach that sensitively. So I think what I would say is safety is first. You have to assess to make sure the situation is safe first. But then from there, if it's a safe enough situation where you can go, you start small. You confront the issue with just a one-to-one first, and then you bring in additional counsel as needed. Now, there might have been more that you wanted me to say on that, because I want to make sure I don't, because there's a lot of different details in Matthew 18, but I want to make sure I'm addressing them.
Well, no, just the idea of conflict restoration.
Mm-hmm.
Matthew 18 is given to us to preserve our brother or sister
Mm-hmm.
who's in error,
Mm-hmm.
to win the
Mm-hmm.
heart of the offender.
Yes.
And so anyway, so my thoughts are toward those who maybe don't know to
Mm-hmm.
the extent that they're offending,
Yes.
not of a violent nature necessarily,
Mm-hmm.
but clearly an oppressive nature or
Yes.
a highly offensive nature.
Yes.
But it's in the context of seniors. It's like you're dealing with people who should know better.
Mm-hmm.
They're well established
Mm-hmm.
in their age and their whatever,
Yes.
but they're still showing this behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I just
Yes.
wanted your thoughts on it.
Yeah.
That's all.
So on the second part, the redemptive end of it, like how do you help redeem the person when you confront them on this? Well, the biggest pieces are you want to be able to see if you can help them empathize, because that's something that's oftentimes that's not being taken as much into consideration. Because oftentimes when a person is doing this, they're really thinking about their own needs. So in the case where I know of children taking advantage, like adult children taking advantage of their elderly parents or grandparents, it's because they financially are in some sort of strait, and they know they can get money from grandma or something like that. A lot of times they can feel guilty about this, but they'll keep doing it until somebody actually says something. Now, the other thing I want to do is I want to identify what the need is that they're addressing through that abuse, if there's some redemptiveness there, and start connecting them to better resources. There are actual connections you can have out there that don't involve exploiting someone that you care about. Third thing is I want to encourage them to make restitution. So any things that have been taken, if somebody's really sincere about change, then as much as is possible, you want to try to help move that person towards restitution. Having a clear conscience and really being able to set these matters straight is of great importance. And so that becomes the next thing that I go through. So this is not a quick fix process, but those would be some of the initial things that I want to do. I want them to be able to empathize with the person who they victimized. I want them to be able to address the needs that they've had that have driven them towards these kind of behaviors. And then I want to provide them with resources that actually allow them to meet the need that they have so they don't use exploitation as a way to meet their needs. And the same thing holds for domestic violence situations.
It's not only their needs, it's
Yeah.
their agenda.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like they might not be motivated because they lack, bread or milk or something, but
Mhm.
they might be just opinionated or hard-headed or just prideful,
Mm-hmm.
and you see these behaviors come out as a result of that intemperance, not so much a financial benefit.
Oh yeah. So even things like that. I mean, because if someone's doing that, that means that their sense of personal integrity, their sense of self-respect stems from like having to put somebody else down, and that's still a need to address, right? Because we do need to feel like we matter and that we're respectable and all this other stuff. But what actually needs to happen again is that needs to be addressed in a better way, because they're exploiting someone to meet a perceived need that they have, and so you want to be able to address that. Now your second one was, sorry, I just left my head. All right, maybe you can repeat that second one because I just.
I don't remember what I said. What was the second one?
Yeah, it had to do with I thought it had to do with domestic violence, but
Well, I guess the first one, they're related.
okay.
Just elderly. So the situation I'm thinking of, I'm the junior,
Mhm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's involving two people that I know. And so they're both seniors though,
Mm-hmm.
technically.
Right. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So even if something is happening like that, this is more so going to fall into the space of conflict resolution. So a few things that need to happen is both people need to hear the other person's side. And I usually don't let people go too much farther in a conversation until they actually understand what the other person is saying. Because oftentimes people get caught in conflicts because they think they know what the other person is trying to say, and a lot of times they do not. Like they actually have not addressed it. There's a technique. It's called tempo. Tempo, like it's like in the tempo or pace of music. Okay. So like the T is like I'll walk people through about what about this conversation has been triggering. That's the T part. Because oftentimes when people are escalated, there's something that's kind of triggered them. Like, there's a word that was said or a gesture that was made. I mean, you'd be surprised how far people will go if they just think somebody meant something. Like they looked at me wrong, or they said this, or they made this statement that really like hit like a sore spot with me. So I want to figure out what the trigger was. The next thing I want to figure out, the E, is I want to figure out what the emotion is, what feeling that's being brought up for them. Oftentimes, if it's something that is escalating, it's usually an emotion that they're not comfortable with, like sadness, or maybe they're not comfortable expressing anger, or they don't like being afraid. So I want to figure out what the emotion is.
Being what?
Afraid. So I want to figure out what that emotion is that they're having difficulty managing.
I think it's disrespect.
Okay. All right. And so I want to know that. And then what I want to find out next is the M, the meaning. Like, what does that mean to be disrespected? It's like, so if I let somebody disrespect me, now what? Well, I can't let somebody disrespect me. Well, why? Well, that means that they don't think I'm a real man, or that means that they don't think X, Y, and Z. And what I do is I kind of walk people through why that's such a big deal. Because a lot of people don't pause and think about why this is such a big deal. Now what happens? Somebody disrespects you. Now is your bank account going to empty itself out? Like, are your dogs going to die? Like, what is really going to happen as a result of this? Now, I don't ever try to be patronizing, but there's a deep-seated meaning behind this that keeps people reacting the way that they do. Then there's the P. The P is usually the protective behavior. So like people do things to protect themselves. So if I feel disrespected, I puff out my chest, I yell, I do whatever it takes to try to get that respect back. And then I'll usually ask them a question around, is that working? If it were working, they wouldn't be here. So I already know it's not working, but I just ask them, is this working? And the definition of insanity is keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And so if yelling at the person repeatedly has not gotten what you wanted, then we need to find the O, which is going to be the organize, which is I need to find a new method. I need to reorganize my behaviors to find out how I actually get to the place I'm trying to get to. So there's a lot more to it, but like that's just a hard, fast rule that I try to use with people. So that's the tempo technique. So it's trigger.
It's called tempo.
Yep. So it's trigger, emotion, meaning, protective behavior, protection, and then organize, which is like you reorganize the behavior to change how they're engaging in that interaction.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So we had one up here.
I'm wondering if you know, within the church, what are the roles or, the roles that are considered mandated reporters, and what is the responsibility of a mandated reporter?
Very good question. So last time I checked, I think anybody who's directly employed by the NAD is considered a mandated reporter. So looking to my wife, so were you considered a mandated reporter when you were working as a church secretary? Okay, but you did training on this when you were there? What was that? Adventist risk management, yeah. So people who are involved with that branch tend to be anybody who's in a position where they have direct responsibility for adults and children tend to be mandated reporters. Anybody who's in the school system 100% is a mandated reporter. Like there's no question about that. Including hospital settings also tend to be mandated reporters as well. Within the church, it gets a little bit fuzzy because I don't know which employees they would consider on that branch because I don't have as much inside knowledge on that. But I know if they're going to be directly working with children, Pathfinders are considered mandated reporters because they are working directly with children. So they do have training on this, and they are supposed to call and report. So and then you said examples of what's considered reportable. Yeah. So the responsibility of a mandated reporter. I know this because I just took my ethics test here in California again. Anyway, so the mandated reporter is reasonable suspicion of abuse. Reasonable suspicion of abuse. And so that includes verbal reports. If a child tells me my mom smacked me in the face, even if I think they're lying, I still have to report as a mandated reporter. So there's no space for personal judgment in this one.
Where do you report it to?
So you would Department of Children and Family Services, social, whatever your local service, social service branch is. In Washington, it's DFY. Here, it's I think it's DFC, but you always have a division of Family and Child Services.
Can you just call CPS?
Yeah, that is CPS. So CPS, yeah. So if you just look up CPS, you'll find the number.
What does CPS stand for?
Child Protective Services. Yeah, and then there's also Adult Protective Services, so APS also exists. So CPS and APS are the ones you call nationally, and they have specific numbers that will allow you to connect directly with that. But any reports or reasonable suspicion of abuse is grounds for reporting. And mandated reporters are not investigators, so it doesn't matter if I think it's true or not, I have to report. We leave the investigation to APS and CPS to do that. So thank you for helping me clarify that, Jen. Yeah, so that tends to be how you decide whether or not to report. All right. Oh, yes, one question here. Oh, is there?
No. Okay. Okay.
Oh, okay. All right.
How many questions do I get?
As many as you could fit in a minute or less. Yeah. No, go ahead. Yeah, but I can.
Okay, so my name is Michael Wood.
Hi, Michael.
Are there any penalties for institutions abusing seniors?
Yes. So the question was, are there penalties for institutions abusing seniors?
Make it closer so I can understand.
Yes. So there are penalties for institutions abusing seniors. The institution actually has the highest liability. So they are considered mandated reporters, and it's specifically their responsibility. So it's the responsibility of the institution to report any instances of abuse, especially of elders or any vulnerable adult populations. And so they carry a very heavy burden. If they don't report these kind of things, they can be fined or shut down, which is part of the reason why sometimes these don't get reported, is because institutions try to protect themselves. But yes, they are responsible for reporting.
Okay. What if a resident of a particular institution is holding a resident against their will, and when they qualify for a discharge, what's the penalty to the, or what's the remedy, for that situation?
Yeah, so so there's a number of channels.
That person is me.
Got it. So when, so this is where it'll get into, so some of the first questions I'll have to address is whether or not anybody has power of attorney. So what they would want to first investigate is who has power of attorney. Like, do you have
May I address
conservator?
it in the middle of your conversation?
Well, I don't know if you want to.
Power of attorney?
I don't know if you want to address all that here and now in front of everyone, but it's.
That's too complicated for right now?
No, it's not complicated. I just don't know if you want me to share, if you want to share personal matters in front. But I'll share with you, if you do have a conservatorship or if you do have power of attorney, then the legal responsibility will be on the person that has power of attorney or conservatorship. And so, but if you don't have either one of those things, then you should have medical autonomy to decide what kind of treatment that you should get. If there are concerns about this, what you'd want to contact is what's referred to as an ombudsman. I don't know if you've heard this term before. It's a weird word that we still use.
Are you asking me a question?
Yes. Have you heard of an ombudsman?
Have I what?
It's called an ombudsman.
Oh, of course.
Okay.
Talked
So.
to him 100 times.
Okay, so that's usually the person that you want to speak to, because they'll be the legal advocate in those kind of situations to tell you what your rights are. So that would be the most direct line that I would say to try to use, especially in the situation that you're talking about. The ombudsman is the one that the state of California says that you would want to contact in situations like
But
these.
what if all that has gone by and the individual is still being held against their will?
So then from there, you would have to...
is there the question is yes or no, is there a penalty to the facility that allows this to happen?
Only if you can demonstrate that they are violating a legal right.
Say again.
If you can demonstrate that they are violating a legal right that you have.
Okay.
Yeah,
I got it.
yeah. No, these are good questions, though. These are not easy questions, but thank you. Those are really, really good questions.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. All right. Other questions? Thank you for that. Okay. All right. So we're probably right about at time. So, oh, yeah, one more. Okay.
Going back to the sermon in the morning with the call to worship about God telling Samuel, they haven't rejected you, they rejected me. So in a modern society, if one is of the same, mentality of I haven't rejected the Creator, how do you as a citizen practice your privilege to vote, but not wanting to be part of the king system established by the man-made stuff? What would one do?
Yes.
Vote versus not vote? How do you politically get engaged or not?
Yes, now that's a very good question. So yeah, you mean restate it? Yeah. So the question was, how do you avoid trying to vote for a king while still maintaining your right to vote, so that you're not voting for someone who may be moving, I guess in this case, moving the country towards that kind of kingly power, but then not dismiss your right to vote. So how do we vote without voting for or trying to ask for a king over us? Which is an excellent question. I don't have the perfect answer. I've always been someone who says at a minimum we should be able to do two things. One is vote your conscience, and then secondly, vote laws. Because laws are a lot more black and white than people are. And people can kind of change on us, because people, unfortunately, politicians will say whatever it takes to secure a vote. And so on the voting your conscience side, I think the reason why this gets so tricky is because whoever I put my vote towards, I carry a little bit of liability for how they conduct themselves if my vote successfully helps to get them into office. And that's why it's just really, really tricky. So I'm not telling anybody what to do, but it does make it a really, really tricky situation. But where I think we can do the most good is on the level of laws that are passed and advocating for laws. This is part of the reason why the Adventist Church has a strong presence in liberty. What's the term? I just totally lost it. Religious liberty. Thank you. I could not get that term in my mind. So religious liberty, because I think these are the places where we can advocate more strongly, making sure that there are correct interpretations of the Constitution. But really, these are the places where I think we have a stronger voice without violating conscience. But if you do vote for a politician, then what I say is you vote your conscience, and just be aware of what directions those can go. I wish I could be more black and white, but it's really tough to be absolute about what the best way to handle that is. So does that at least provide a little bit of an answer? Or
Absolutely, of course. And if I may follow up, in the sense that God says, okay, give them a king. This is what they want. They want to be like other nations. Give them the judges. So in our modern society, that's a voting system. Now, if a person were to say, before one rejects God, he said, they're rejecting me. They could just listen to me. I'm their king. But they reject me. They want somebody else to rule over them. So if a person were to say, modern voting system is a man-made stuff, I want to follow the true source. Would one even get involved in current politics? Yeah,
that's a good question. Like I said, if I'm very much a proponent of you follow your conscience. If the big issue is going to be, are the things that people are representing, do they actually represent what we believe? If they don't, then I don't think we can in good conscience follow that. And that's why that becomes a very personal matter. But even in the situation with Israel, where he gave them a king, their first allegiance had to be to God. So even if the king tells you to do something that's unlawful, your first allegiance is to God. So God still remains our king regardless of what the earth does. And that's part of the reason, that's what made Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, David, and you can go on and on down the list. It's what made them such powerful figures in the Bible, because it was clear who their king was regardless of who was on the earthly throne. They always knew who their king was. You can tell Jesus marched to the beat of a different drum. He wasn't loyal to Caesar. He was loyal to God, and it was very clear in how he conducted himself. And he was very clear on the separation between church and state. That's why he gets that question where, who do we give to? Do we give to Caesar or to God? He made it very clear that you give Caesar what's his, and you give God what's his, and God obviously is going to be first. In fact, can I just give a really quick, you notice that that what Jesus uses as the basis for what belongs to Caesar is, he said, show me a coin, and he says whose signature and whose image is on there, right? And that signature and image on the coin is Caesar's. But what he's implying is whose signature and image is on you, right? So whose image do you bear, and whose signature is on you? That word signature is deeply connected to the word seal. So whoever's image you bear and whoever's signature is on you, that is the person to whom you owe your first allegiance. And Jesus made that very clear. So you let Caesar have his coins, but you let God have your heart. So, all right. All right, so this is an okay place to pause. Now, I'll be milling about afterwards, but maybe we can, unless there was any last second questions, maybe we can close this portion with prayer, and then, like I said, I'm not going anywhere just yet. So if anybody has any personal questions, you can come find me. I'm not going anywhere just yet. So, all right. Well, let's go ahead and have a word of prayer, and then we'll close. Our Father in heaven, I thank you for this opportunity to be able to stand, Lord, and to be able to answer questions, hopefully questions that are helping people, Lord, in their walk with you and their efforts to minister to others, Lord. I know that you have a plan and direction for this church in particular, and I pray that you bless each member here to be vessels through whom you can work. And I pray that they would be men and women after your heart, Lord, that they would be soldiers, Lord, who when they go out into this world, they know, the people of this world know that they are not marching to the orders of earthly kings, but are following the King of heaven, who rules in their hearts. And may they be a source of healing, a source of inspiration, a source of protection. May people feel safe in their presence, Lord, and know that there is someone there who cares for them and will do what is good and right and just. And I pray that you would bless the remainder of the Sabbath day, that we can continue to dwell a little longer in your presence, and that we would experience the rest that you promise. And ask for this in the name of Jesus. Amen. All right. Many blessings. And
David, can we sing a song?
yeah, please, please.